The body of former President Professor George Maxwell Richards has been lying in state at the Parliament building at the International Waterfront for public viewing since 9 o'clock this morning. The former president's casket, draped in the national flag, has been placed inside the Parliament building, surrounded by 4 vigil officers. Mr. Richards' wife, Dr. Jean Ramjohn-Richards, and his daughter Maxine were among the first to pay their respects. Now, they then took up position towards the left of the open casket to receive people coming in. Among the first was the President of the Senate, Acting President Christine Kangaloo, followed by Speaker of the House Bridgid Annisette-George. Now, just after 10 o'clock, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley arrived at the Parliament to pay respect to the late former president and sign the condolence book. Chief Justice Ivor Archie followed soon after, and Opposition Leader Kamla Prasad-Bissessa and Opposition MPs were also among those paying respects. Now, CNews senior journalist Karen Kozier-Phillip is down at the Parliament building where the public viewing of the former President George Maxwell Richards continues. And as we just told you, several dignitaries have already come to show their respects, but several members of the public may be using their lunch breaks to do the same. What is happening down at the waterfront now, Karen?
Yes, we're here outside Tower D, the Parliament building, for the first day of TTV's coverage of the funeral, the state funeral for former President George Maxwell Richards. Of course, he is lying in state in the Parliament building, in Tower D of the Parliament building. They have just opened the doors to members of the public who wish to view the body and, of course, sign the condolence books. I can tell you that one Standard 4 class of the Newtown Boys Primary School went in. They were the first to go in, first members of the public to enter Tower D to view the casket and, of course, to pay their respects to former President George Maxwell Richards. And a few other members of the public have gone in. Just to recap a little earlier what happened, the Dr. Jean Ramjohn-Richards, the late president's wife, was the first to arrive. She arrived here at around 9:30 this morning. She was the first to view the body and, of course, to take a seat behind the casket. She was followed by Christine Kangaloo, the acting president of Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, and, of course, opposition leader Kamla Prasad-Bissessa, and members of the opposition also came to pay their respects and, of course, to view the casket and to sign the condolence book. I can tell you that Mrs. Prasad-Bissessa said she did sign the book, and she signed it to the president, to the Max, of course. Max, as he was affectionately known, George Maxwell Richards, and she signed it to the president, to the Max. She said she had fond memories of her encounters with former President George Maxwell Richards, from her days in UE to becoming the first female opposition leader and, of course, the first female prime minister. She said that he once told her that her name is Kamla and she has to remain calm. That was one of the memories that stood out in her mind, of course, of the former President George Maxwell Richards. Opposition member Prakash Ramana, the St. Augustine MP, said that Trinidadians and Tobagonians need to emulate the life of the former president, as he was down to earth, he was witty, but he was also a stickler for education. He was a man who was a stickler for education, of course, rising to become the principal of the University of the West Indies. Dr. Rudal Munilal, another opposition MP, said President George Maxwell Richards was invited to his wedding in 2003, and he gave him some words of advice for a marriage which has lasted 15 years or so. He didn't want to share that advice with us, but he also remembers the president as a jovial, down-to-earth person. We saw a few members of opposition, a few members of Parliament of opposition, Nicole Oliveri, of course, the MP for Labray. We also saw Avinash Singh, the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture. But of course, today is Monday, it's the beginning of the week, and we do understand that members of Parliament are in their various meetings, cabinet meetings, so they are expected here a little later this afternoon. So for now, it's as I said, it's open to members of the public. There's a slow but steady stream of members of the public heading in to view the casket of the former president, the late George Maxwell Richards. I am Karen Kozier-Phillip reporting from the waterfront for CNews.
And thank you so much for that report, Karen. This week's arrangements for the state funeral of former President George Maxwell Richards has also brought changes to the inter-island sailing schedule from today until Wednesday, January 17th. The Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago and the Trinidad and Tobago Inter-Island Transportation Company Limited confirmed amendments have been made to today's sailing schedule from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. And on Tuesday, January 16th, the inter-island transport will now sail at 3 p.m. And on Wednesday, January 17th, the original sailing time of 12 noon has now been changed to 3 p.m. Now, departure from Scarborough will remain at 6:30 a.m. and the cargo vessel, the MV Cabo Star, will maintain its daily schedule from Port of Spain at 2 p.m. and from Tobago at 11 p.m.